The bullet was never meant for her. It was calibrated for the skull of a 6-year-old boy, the heir to the biggest crime syndicate in New York. But fate has a funny way of intervening. When the shot rang out, Sophie didn't think about the physics, didn't think about the politics, didn't think about the fact that the man standing next to the child was Lorenzo Duca, a man who could end a life with a phone call. She just saw a child in danger, and she moved. Pop, 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 pop. The sounds were sickeningly quiet, like firecrackers underwater. Sophie felt a sensation like a sledgehammer hitting her upper back. It wasn't pain at first, just massive kinetic impact that knocked the wind from her lungs. Then her blood stained the pavement, and she didn't know she had just started a war that would burn the city down and melt the ice around the devil's heart. How did a waitress with $500 to her name end up taking a bullet for the most dangerous family in New York? How did a desperate act of courage turn into a war between empires? And how did the man they called a monster learn to love again? This is the story of Sophie Vance, the woman who stopped a bullet and started a revolution. Sophie Vance stared at the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. 72 hours. That's how long she had before everything she owned ended up on a Queens sidewalk. She peeled off the notice, folded it carefully, and tucked it into her purse next to the overdue electricity bill and the final demand from the hospital billing department. $80,000. That's what it cost to watch her mother die of cancer over 18 months. And Sophie had paid every cent she could. It just wasn't enough. She checked her phone. 2 shifts today. Breakfast at the diner in Jackson Heights. Dinner service at the Gilded Fork in Manhattan. 16 hours on her feet. Maybe $200 in tips if she was lucky. Maybe. Sophie splashed cold water on her face in the tiny bathroom. Looked at herself in the cracked mirror. 24 years old. Dark circles under amber eyes. Hair that needed a cut she couldn't afford. Hands red and rough from scrubbing tables and washing dishes. This wasn't the life she'd imagined. 2 years ago, she was in nursing school. Top of her class. Scholarship student with a future. Then her mother got sick, and futures became luxuries. She grabbed her worn server apron and headed out. 3 days to save her life. 3 days to pull off a miracle. She didn't know the miracle was already waiting for her, in the form of a monster in a $1,000 suit. The dinner rush at the Gilded Fork was controlled chaos. Clattering porcelain, shouting chefs, the low hum of expensive conversations. Sophie weaved through tables with practiced grace, her feet throbbing in cheap non-slip shoes. Table 4 needs water, Sophie. Pick up the pace. Mr. Henderson barked, wiping sweat from his receding hairline. On it, Sophie said, voice steady despite exhaustion dragging at her eyelids. The restaurant was an upscale trap for tourists and mid-level stockbrokers. But tonight, the atmosphere had shifted. A heavy silence descended over the VIP section in the back corner. Sophie approached table 12, the booth furthest from the windows, and stopped breathing. Lorenzo Duca. Even Sophie, who kept her head down and ignored gossip columns, knew who he was. The papers called him a logistics magnate. The streets called him the capo. He was terrifyingly handsome. Sharp cheekbones, eyes the color of a stormy sea. A suit that cost more than Sophie's entire life earnings. But it was the coldness radiating off him that made people lose their appetites. Tonight, though, the monster was on dad duty. Sitting across from him were 2 identical 6-year-old boys, Matteo and Luca, dressed in miniature suits, looking uncomfortable and bored. Eat your vegetables, Lorenzo said. His voice was a low rumble, authoritative but strained. He clearly knew how to run an empire, but had no idea how to negotiate with a 6-year-old regarding broccoli. I hate green trees. One of the twins, Matteo, Sophie guessed, grumbled, crossing his arms. I want nuggets. This is a 5-star Italian establishment, Matteo. They do not serve nuggets. Lorenzo sighed, rubbing his temples. Sophie stepped up, poured water into crystal glasses with practiced elegance. Actually, she said softly. Lorenzo's head snapped up, his gaze locked onto hers. Intense, analyzing. If the kitchen cuts the chicken Milanese into small squares and serves it with a marinara on the side, it's basically fancy nuggets. Lorenzo stared at her. The air grew thick. Usually staff were too terrified to speak unless spoken to. Is that so? Lorenzo asked, eyes narrowing slightly. Sophie didn't flinch. She smiled at the twins. And the green trees? If you eat them, you get super strength. That's how the Hulk got big. Lots of broccoli. Luca's eyes widened. Really, I wouldn't lie to a customer. Sophie winked. So chicken Milanese cut into squares, and we keep the trees? Yes, both boys shouted. Lorenzo looked at the waitress. He saw the frayed collar on her uniform, the dark circles under her amber eyes, hands red from scrubbing tables. But he also saw a spine of steel. She wasn't afraid of him. Do it, Lorenzo said, dismissing her with a wave, though his eyes lingered on her retreating figure a second longer than necessary. Sophie burst out into the cool New York night air. The valet was bringing around a sleek, armored black SUV. Lorenzo was herding the boys onto the sidewalk, his back momentarily turned as he adjusted Luca's coat. That's when Sophie saw it. Across the street, a parked gray sedan, window rolling down. Not all the way, just enough for the barrel of a suppressed submachine gun to slide out. Street lamp glinted off the metal. Time slowed down. The security guards were looking at oncoming traffic to the left. The car was on the right. Lorenzo was looking down at his son. No one saw it but her. Get down, Sophie screamed. The sound of her own voice felt foreign. Raw, terrified. She didn't think. Dropped the check folder. Didn't run away. Ran forward. Sprinted the 10 feet between the door and the family. Lorenzo began to turn at her scream, hand reaching for the gun inside his jacket. But he was too slow. The twins were exposed. The first muzzle flash lit up the gray sedan. Sophie threw herself through the air. A desperate, clumsy dive. Wrapped her arms around 2 small boys. Tackled them to hard concrete, shielding their small bodies with her own fragile frame. Pop, 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 pop. Sophie felt a sensation like a sledgehammer hitting her upper back. Not pain at first. Just massive kinetic impact that knocked the wind out of her lungs. Then the world exploded into chaos. Cover. Get them to the car now. Lorenzo's voice was a roar of pure, unadulterated rage. He had his weapon drawn instantly. Fired 4 controlled shots at the fleeing gray sedan. Shattered its rear windshield. But the car screeched away, tires smoking, disappearing into city traffic. Lorenzo holstered his weapon, spun around, his heart hammering against his ribs, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Papa! Matteo was crying. Lorenzo looked down. The scene on the sidewalk was a nightmare. Sophie lay sprawled over his children. She wasn't moving. Her waitress uniform, crisp white button-down, was rapidly turning deep, terrifying crimson across the right shoulder and back. Boys, are you hurt? Did you get hit? Lorenzo fell to his knees, expensive suit dragging in dirt. He pulled the twins out from under her. They were shaking, terrified, covered in blood. But he quickly realized it wasn't theirs. She's bleeding, Papa. The nice lady is bleeding. Luca screamed. Lorenzo handed the boys to Rocco, his head of security. A giant of a man who'd appeared from nowhere. Put them in the armored car. Do not stop until you're inside the compound. Go! Rocco nodded, grabbing the boys and shoving them into the SUV. The engine roared. The vehicle sped off. Lorenzo was alone on the sidewalk with the woman. He turned her over gently. Her face was pale, amber eyes fluttering, losing focus. She was in shock. Hey, Lorenzo said, voice surprisingly steady. He applied pressure to the wound on her shoulder. Hi, near the collarbone. A through and through. Or maybe the bullet was lodged. Look at me. What's your name? The bill, Sophie whispered, blood bubbling slightly at the corner of her lips. She was delirious. You tipped too much. Stay with me, Lorenzo commanded. He ripped off his silk tie, pressed it against the wound to staunch the flow. The restaurant staff huddled in the doorway, too scared to come out. Call 911, Lorenzo bellowed, eyes flashing with demonic fury. Tell them to bring a trauma unit now. He looked back down at her. She was tiny, fragile. Why? Why had she done it? In his world, people only took bullets for money or power. She was a waitress, a civilian. She owed him nothing. Are they okay? she rasped, hand gripping his wrist. Her grip was weak, trembling. Lorenzo felt a strange tightening in his chest. She wasn't asking about herself. She was dying, and she was asking about his sons. "They're safe," Lorenzo said, leaning close to her ear. "Because of you. You saved them." Sophie smiled. Faint. Ghostly. "Good, that's good." Her eyes rolled back. Her head lolled to the side. No, you don't get to quit." Lorenzo growled. He scooped her up in his arms. She weighed nothing. He didn't wait for the ambulance. Couldn't trust an ambulance. If a hitman came back, she'd be a sitting duck in a city vehicle. A second black SUV from his convoy screeched to a halt at the curb. Back door flew open. St. Jude's Hospital. Lorenzo ordered the driver as he climbed in with Sophie in his arms. "Call Dr. Thorne personally. Tell him if she dies, I burn the hospital down." As the car sped through red lights of Manhattan, Lorenzo looked down at the unconscious woman staining his shirt with her blood. He felt cold, calculated fury rising, directed at whoever ordered the hit. But beneath that, there was confusion. He touched her cheek. It was cooling rapidly. "Who are you?" he whispered. Act I ending. The waiting room of St. Jude's private wing was silent, save for the rhythmic tapping of Lorenzo's Italian leather shoe against the marble floor. The entire floor had been locked down. Men with earpieces at every elevator and stairwell. Rocco approached, holding a tablet. He looked nervous. Nobody liked giving bad news to Lorenzo Duca. "What do we know?" Lorenzo asked, not looking up from the floor. He'd washed blood off his hands, but he could still smell the metallic tang. "We ran the plates on the gray sedan," Rocco said. "Stolen 2 days ago in Jersey. Burner vehicle. Professional job." "And the woman?" Lorenzo gestured to the operating room doors. "Sophie Vance. Age 24. Rocco swiped on the tablet. "Boss, she's clean. I mean, squeaky clean. No criminal record. Not even a parking ticket." He continued. "Dropped out of college 2 years ago. Nursing school, when her mother got sick. Mother died 6 months ago. Dad's been out of the picture for a decade." Lorenzo frowned. "Debts? Just medical bills from her mom's cancer treatment. About $80,000. She lives in a studio apartment in Queens. Works double shifts at the restaurant and tutors math on weekends." Lorenzo stood, walked to the window, looking out over the city skyline. He'd expected her to be a plant, a spy sent by the Russian mob or the triads to get close to him, staging a rescue to earn his trust. Oldest trick in the book. "So you're telling me," Lorenzo said slowly, "that a girl with nothing, who's struggling to eat, threw herself in front of a submachine gun for 2 children she didn't know?" "It appears that way, boss," Rocco said. Lorenzo clenched his jaw. It didn't compute. In Lorenzo's life, altruism didn't exist. Everyone had an angle. Everyone wanted a piece of the pie. The double doors swung open. Dr. Aries Thorne, best trauma surgeon on the East Coast, and a man who owed Lorenzo 3 separate favors, stepped out, pulled off his surgical cap, looked exhausted. Lorenzo turned. "Well, she's lucky," Dr. Thorne said. "The bullet shattered the clavicle and nicked the subclavian artery. She lost a lot of blood. Another inch to the left, and it would have hit the heart. Another inch to the right, and she would have bled out in 2 minutes. Will she live? She's stable. We had to reconstruct the shoulder. She's going to be in a lot of pain. She'll need months of physical therapy. But yes, she will live." Lorenzo let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Move her to the VIP suite. Post 2 guards at the door. No one enters without my approval. Not even nurses." "Lorenzo," Dr. Thorne warned. "She's a civilian. She's going to wake up terrified. Seeing armed guards isn't going to help. If someone wanted my boys dead," Lorenzo said coldly, "they might try to finish the job on the witness. She is under my protection now." Lorenzo walked past the doctor, into the recovery room. Sophie looked even smaller in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors and 4 drips. Her skin was translucent against white sheets. He pulled a chair up to the bedside, sat down, watched the rise and fall of her chest. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number. "Find out who authorized the hit," Lorenzo said into the phone, voice devoid of humanity. "Tear the city apart. Break fingers. Break legs. I want a name by sunrise." He hung up. Sophie stirred. Eyelids fluttered, opened, blinked disoriented, fighting the fog of anesthesia. Her eyes landed on Lorenzo. "The boys," she whispered, voice scratchy. "They're home. They're sleeping." Lorenzo lied. They were actually awake, crying, asking for the angel lady. But she didn't need to know that. "You saved their lives, Sophie." She tried to nod, winced. "Ouch. Don't move," Lorenzo said, leaning forward. "You were shot." "Shot," she repeated, reality sinking in. Tears welled up in her eyes. "I can't be here. I have a shift tomorrow. If I miss it, Henderson will fire me. And I can't pay for this room. I don't have insurance." Lorenzo looked at her. She had a hole in her shoulder, and she was worried about her minimum wage job. "You are not going back to that restaurant," Lorenzo said firmly. "And you will never see a bill for this hospital. I own this wing. You own the wing." "I own a lot of things," Lorenzo said. He reached out, took her uninjured hand. Her fingers were rough, callous from hard work, contrasting with his manicured hand. "You took a bullet for my blood. By the laws of my world, that makes you family. And family doesn't worry about rent." Sophie looked at him, confusion and fear mixing in her eyes. "Mr. Duca, I just did what anyone would do." "No." Lorenzo shook his head, dark eyes boring into hers. "Most people would have run. You didn't." The door opened. Rocco stepped in again. He looked paler than before. "Boss," Rocco whispered, urgent. "We got a hit on the shooter's phone. The last call made before the shooting. It came from inside the organization." Lorenzo froze. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Inside." "It came from the capo of the Brooklyn territory. Julian Vargo." Lorenzo stood slowly. Julian Vargo. His cousin. The man he'd grown up with. He looked back at Sophie. She was watching him, sensing the shift in his energy. From protector to predator. "Rest, Sophie," Lorenzo said, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I have to go take out the trash." He walked to the door, stopped just before he left. "Rocco," he said, "pack her things. As soon as she can be moved, bring her to the estate. The hospital isn't safe anymore." "The estate, boss?" "You never bring outsiders to the estate," Rocco argued. "She's not an outsider anymore," Lorenzo said, looking back at the sleeping woman. "She's the only person in this city I know I can trust." The warehouse on the Brooklyn docks smelled like rust and fear. Lorenzo walked in, flanked by 6 of his best soldiers. All armed, all silent. In the center of the empty space, tied to a metal chair under a single hanging bulb, sat Julian Vargo. 42 years old, Lorenzo's cousin, his childhood friend, the man who'd stood as best man at Lorenzo's wedding. Julian's face was already bruised. Rocco's work, but he was conscious, alert, and terrified. Lorenzo approached slowly, each footstep echoing in the cavernous space. He didn't speak, just walked a circle around his cousin, studying him. "Lorenzo," Julian finally said, voice cracking. "Please, let me explain." Lorenzo stopped in front of him. "Explain." One word, cold as winter. "The organization, you've gone soft. Everyone sees it. You're spending time with those boys instead of handling business. The Russians, the Colombians, they're eating into our territory because you're distracted." Lorenzo tilted his head slightly. "So you decided to kill my sons." "Not kill them," Julian protested. "Scare you. Make you realize you can't be a father and a Don. You have to choose." "I did choose," Lorenzo said quietly. He pulled a gun from his waistband, checked the chamber. "Loaded." "Lorenzo, please. We're blood. We grew up together. Your father raised me when mine died. You can't." "My boys are blood," Lorenzo interrupted. You stopped being family the moment you aimed a gun at children." Julian started crying. "It wasn't supposed to go down like that. The shooter was supposed to miss. Just scare them." "I swear." "He didn't miss," Lorenzo said. "He hit a 24-year-old waitress who threw herself in front of the bullets. An innocent woman. Because of you." He raised the gun, pressed it to Julian's forehead. "Lorenzo, no. Please. I'll leave the city. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. Please." Lorenzo looked into his cousin's eyes, saw the man he used to know, the boy who taught him how to ride a bike, who helped him pick out an engagement ring for his wife, who held him when that wife died. And Lorenzo pulled the trigger. Bang! The sound echoed. Julian's body slumped, blood pooling on the concrete floor. Lorenzo lowered the gun. His hand wasn't shaking. It should have been, but it wasn't. "Clean it up," he said to his men. "Make it look like the Russians did it. I want this to start a war with Petcher's organization." "Yes, boss." Lorenzo walked out of the warehouse, got into his car, sat in the back seat, alone, and for the first time in 10 years, he put his head in his hands and shook. Not with grief, with the realization that he'd just murdered family, and he'd do it again, without hesitation, because his sons mattered more than blood. But at what cost? Consciousness returned to Sophie in waves. This time, the smell of antiseptic was replaced by lavender and expensive cedarwood. She blinked her eyes open, expected sterile white hospital tiles. Instead, she was met with a fresco of cherubs and storm clouds painted high above her, framed by elaborate crown molding. She tried to sit up. Sharp burning pain in her shoulder pinned her back. She gasped, "Easy, Miss Vance. You'll tear the stitches." Sophie turned her head. Sitting in a velvet armchair in the corner was a woman in her 50s, dressed in a stark black housekeeper uniform. Face severe, hair pulled back in a tight bun that seemed to pull her features into a permanent scowl. "Where am I?" Sophie asked, voice trembling. She looked around. The room was larger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows draped in heavy emerald velvet. Furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. "You are at the Duca estate in the Hamptons," the woman said, standing and pouring a glass of water. "I am Elena, the head housekeeper. Mr. Duca ordered that you be brought here for your recovery. He felt the city was compromised." The Hamptons. Sophie's mind raced. That was 2 hours away from the city. "I can't be here," Sophie panicked, ignoring pain as she pushed herself up on her good arm. "I have to go back. My landlord. My job." "Your landlord has been paid for the next year," Elena said, handing her the glass. Tone flat, unimpressed. "And your employment at the Gilded Fork has been terminated." Sophie froze, glass halfway to her lips. "What?" "Mr. Duca deemed it an unsafe working environment. He bought the building this morning. It's currently being renovated." Sophie stared at the woman, mouth slightly open. "He bought the building because she got shot?" This wasn't gratitude. This was madness. This was control. "I need to speak to him," Sophie said firmly. "The boss is not here. He's in the city, handling business." Elena said, a dark shadow passing over her face. "He will return when he returns. In the meantime, you're to rest. Dr. Thorne will be by in the afternoon to check your dressing." For the next 2 days, Sophie was a prisoner in a gilded tower. Beautiful prison, stocked with gourmet food and silk pajamas, but a prison nonetheless. The door was never locked, but outside her room stood a guard named Dante, who looked like he chewed rocks for breakfast. He politely but firmly told her she wasn't allowed past the East Wing landing. For her own safety. On the third night, the silence was broken. 2 a.m. Sophie was awake, throbbing in her shoulder, keeping sleep at bay. Through the thick oak door, she heard it. A high-pitched, terrifying scream. A child scream. Adrenaline dulled the pain. She swung her legs out of bed, grabbed the silk robe Lorenzo had provided, opened her door. Dante was gone, likely on a perimeter check or bathroom break. Sophie followed the sound, down the long, dimly lit hallway, to a set of double doors slightly ajar. She pushed them open. The room was a nursery, filled with toys that had never been played with. Shelves of books that looked brand new. In the center, on a bed shaped like a race car, sat Matteo, thrashing against sheets, sobbing. Eyes squeezed shut. No, don't shoot, Papa," he screamed. In the bed next to him, Lucas sat up, clutching a teddy bear, tears streaming down his face, too terrified to move. "Hey," Sophie whispered, rushing into the room. She ignored stabbing pain and knelt between the beds. "Matteo, wake up. It's just a dream." The boy's eyes flew open. He was hyperventilating, pupils blown wide with panic. He looked at Sophie but didn't see her. He saw the gun. He saw the blood. "They're going to get us," Matteo wailed. "No one is going to get you," Sophie said, voice soft but firm. The same tone she used when customers screamed about wait times. She reached out, placed a hand on his chest. "Feel that. That's your heart. It's beating fast because it's trying to run a race. We need to tell it to walk. Mateo looked at her hand, then up at her face. Angel lady? Sophie smiled weakly. Just Sophie. But I'm here. Are you dead? Luca asked from the other bed, voice trembling. Papa said you were sleeping, but Mommy went asleep and never woke up. Sophie's heart broke. She turned and reached for Luca, pulled him into the huddle. I'm not dead. See? I'm warm. She took Luca's small hand and pressed it to her cheek. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. My tummy hurts, Mateo whimpered. That's just the fear, Sophie said. You know what helps? A song. My mom used to sing it to me when the thunder was too loud. She began to hum. A low, melodic tune. An old lullaby. Something simple and sweet. Her voice wasn't professional, but it was clear, filled with a warmth that seemed to fill the cold, empty room. Slowly, the boys' breathing evened out. Mateo stopped shaking. Luca unclenched his grip on the bear. Within 10 minutes, they were both leaning against the mattress. Eyelids heavy, Sophie sat on the floor between them, stroking their hair, ignoring the agony in her own body. She stayed there until their breathing turned into the rhythmic puff of deep sleep. She didn't hear the door creak. Lorenzo Duca stood in the doorway, still wearing his suit from the city. Tie gone, white shirt stained with dirt and specks of blood that weren't his. He looked exhausted, a man carrying the weight of the world. He'd come to check on his sons because he'd heard the screaming from the hallway. Expected to find Mrs. Gable, the nanny, failing to comfort them as usual. Instead, he found Sophie. She was slumped against the side of Mateo's bed, asleep on the floor, injured shoulder hunched awkwardly, face pale in the moonlight, one hand still resting protectively over Luca's blanket. Lorenzo felt a lump form in his throat. He'd spent the last 48 hours dismantling his cousin's operation, breaking bones, burning warehouses, consumed by hatred and violence. He felt like a monster. But looking at this woman, this waitress who had nothing, guarding his children like a lioness, he felt something he hadn't felt since his wife died. Hope. He walked into the room silently. Didn't wake her. Couldn't bear to disturb the peace she'd created. Instead, he took the cashmere throw from the rocking chair, gently draped it over her. He sat in the chair in the corner, gun heavy in his holster, and watched her sleep for the rest of the night. The monster watching over the angel. Act 2 ending. The next morning, the dynamic in the house shifted. When Sophie woke, she found herself tucked into Mateo's bed. The boys had apparently dragged her up during the night. 2 6-year-olds staring at her. You snore, Luca informed her solemnly. I do not, Sophie laughed, wincing as she sat up. You do. Like a pug, Mateo added. They followed her everywhere. When she went to the kitchen for breakfast, they marched behind her like ducklings. When she sat in the library to read, they brought coloring books and sat at her feet. The staff, who'd been cold before, watched with wide eyes. Mrs. Gable, the stern certified nanny who'd been with the family for a year, looked ready to quit. She'd never been able to get the twins to sit still for more than 5 minutes. Sophie had them organized and eating oatmeal within 20. But the master of the house was missing. It wasn't until late that evening that Sophie saw him. She'd wandered down to the kitchen to get water. The house was dark, shadows stretching long and ominous in the hallways. She found Lorenzo in the kitchen, leaning against the marble island, glass of amber liquid in one hand, staring at the wall. Lights were off, save for under-cabinet lighting that cast his face in sharp relief. He looked dangerous, but he also looked broken. Mr. Duca, Sophie whispered. Lorenzo didn't jump. Slowly turned his head. Eyes were red-rimmed. Sophie, he said, voice rough like gravel. You should be resting. Dr. Thorne said you need sleep. I slept all day. She lied. She walked further into the room, tightening her robe. Is everything okay? Elena said you were handling business. Lorenzo let out a dry, humorless laugh. Took a sip of whiskey. Business. That's a polite word for it. He set the glass down. Looked at her. I killed him, Sophie. The air in the kitchen went still. Sophie gripped the back of a chair. She didn't ask who. Didn't need to. My cousin Julian, Lorenzo continued, words spilling out as if he couldn't hold them back anymore. He was the one. He wanted the territory. He thought I was getting soft because of the boys. He thought if he killed them, I would break. He looked at his hands. He was my blood, and I put a bullet in his chest without blinking. Sophie looked at him. She should be terrified. This man was a confessed killer. He was the head of a crime family. Every instinct should be screaming at her to run. But she didn't run. She saw the trembling in his hands. She saw a father who'd been pushed to the edge of sanity to protect his cubs. She walked around the island, stood in front of him. She was so short, she had to look up to meet his eyes. "You protected your family," Sophie said softly. "That doesn't make you a monster, Lorenzo. It makes you a father." Lorenzo stared at her. No one had ever spoken to him like that. People either feared him or wanted something from him. "You took a bullet for them," Lorenzo said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Why? You don't know us. You don't owe us anything. Why did you do it?" "Because they're children," Sophie said simply. "And because I know what it's like to lose someone. I know what it's like to be left behind. I couldn't let that happen to them." Lorenzo reached out. His hand hovered near her face. Then gently, hesitantly, he tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers grazed her skin, sending a jolt of electricity through them both. "You are too good for this world, Sophie," he whispered. "And you're definitely too good for mine. Maybe your world needs a little good in it," she challenged, heart pounding against her ribs. Lorenzo's eyes dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes. The tension was palpable, a magnetic pull that terrified them both. "I have a proposition for you," Lorenzo said, stepping back, putting distance between them as if he couldn't trust himself. "A proposition? My sons. They're broken. Their mother died 2 years ago. An overdose. She struggled with demons. I couldn't fight for her." Lorenzo's face hardened at the memory. Since then, they haven't trusted anyone. Until you. You're the first person they've smiled at in months. He took a deep breath. "I want you to stay. Not as a guest. As their governess. Their guardian." Sophie blinked. "Lorenzo, I'm a waitress. I don't know how to raise heirs to a logistics empire. I don't need them to be heirs right now," Lorenzo said fiercely. "I need them to be happy. I will pay you 10 times what you made at the restaurant. You'll have your own wing of the house. Full autonomy. But more importantly, I need to know they're safe. And I trust no one but you." Sophie looked at him, thought of her lonely apartment in Queens, thought of the dead-end job, then thought of Matteo and Luca holding her hand, terrified of the dark. "I'll do it," she said, "but on one condition." Lorenzo raised an eyebrow. "Name it." "No more secrets," Sophie said, pointing a finger at him. "If I'm going to protect them, I need to know what I'm protecting them from. I need to know the threats. I need to know the truth." Lorenzo looked at her for a long moment. Then a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. It transformed him, making him look younger, less like a statue and more like a man. "Deal," he said. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box, slid it across the counter. "What is this?" Sophie asked. "A precaution," Lorenzo said. "Julian is dead, but his partners aren't. The Russian syndicate he was working with. They'll come looking for answers. They know a woman saved the boys. They know you're here." Sophie opened the box. Inside was a ring, not a diamond engagement ring, but a heavy gold signet ring with a duca crest, a lion holding a sword. "Wear this," Lorenzo commanded. "In my world, this ring means you're under the personal protection of the capo. If anyone sees this, they'll know that touching you means declaring war on the entire East Coast." Sophie hesitated, then took the ring. It was heavy. She slid it onto her right hand. It fit perfectly. "Welcome to the family, Sophie," Lorenzo said. Before Sophie could answer, a loud crash echoed from the front of the house. The sound of breaking glass. Lorenzo's demeanor shifted instantly. Vulnerability vanished, replaced by the cold, lethal soldier. He drew a gun from the back of his waistband in one fluid motion. "Get down," he hissed, pushing Sophie behind the heavy marble island. "What is it?" Sophie gasped. "The Russians," Lorenzo growled, checking the safety on his weapon. They didn't wait for sunrise. The kitchen doors burst open, but it wasn't Russians. It was Rocco, looking bloodied and terrified, dragging a man in a suit with him. "Boss," Rocco shouted. "We have a problem. The leak. It wasn't just Julian. Rocco threw the man onto the floor. Sophie peeked over the counter. She recognized the man. It was Mr. Henderson, her old manager from the restaurant. He was the spotter, Rocco spat. He signaled the shooter when you left the restaurant. Lorenzo stared down at the trembling restaurant manager. His eyes went black. Sophie, Lorenzo said, voice calm and terrifying. Cover your ears. As Sophie ducked down, covering her ears and closing her eyes, she realized. The golden cage she'd just agreed to live in was actually a fortress under siege. And she was right in the center of the kill zone. The silence that followed Henderson's dragging away was heavier than gunfire. Lorenzo didn't kill him in the kitchen. He simply nodded to Rocco, and the screaming manager was removed from the room. Sophie didn't ask what happened next. In this new world she inhabited, ignorance was a form of survival. The revelation that her own manager had sold her and the children out for gambling debts changed everything. The threat wasn't just external. It was everywhere. Total lockdown. Lorenzo ordered that night. No one in, no one out. The estate is now a fortress. For the next 3 months, the Duca estate became a bubble of tension and unexpected domesticity. Outside the high stone walls, a silent war was raging. Lorenzo's soldiers hunting down the Russian cell that had partnered with his late cousin. But inside, a strange, fragile family was forming. Sophie's recovery was slow. Physical therapy was grueling, leaving her exhausted and aching. But she refused to stay in bed. She took over the boys' homeschooling, turned the sterile museum-like library into a fort made of pillows and expensive drapes. She taught Matteo how to tie his shoes without crying. She taught Luca how to paint, and she taught Lorenzo how to breathe. It happened on a Tuesday, during a thunderstorm. The power had flickered out, rare occurrence for a house with backup generators, plunging the main hall into darkness. Lorenzo was pacing by the fireplace, phone pressed to his ear, barking orders at his lieutenants. He was afraid. Hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night since the shooting. He was a loaded gun, ready to misfire. Sophie walked in holding a candelabra. Soft light illuminated the scars on her shoulder, visible beneath the strap of her tank top. Lorenzo, she said softly. He spun around, hand instinctively going to his hip. When he saw her, he relaxed, but only slightly. He hung up the phone. The generator should have kicked in, he muttered. I need to check the perimeter sensors. If the grid is down, we're blind. The sensors are on a separate battery backup. Rocco checked them 5 minutes ago, Sophie said, walking toward him. Sit down. I can't sit. Petra is making a move on the shipping yards. If I lose the yards, I'll lose my leverage with the commission. Lorenzo, Sophie said, stepping into his personal space. She reached out and took the phone from his hand. He let her take it. The yard will be there in an hour. Your sanity might not be. She guided him to the leather sofa. He sank into it, exhaustion finally crashing over him. He looked at her in the candlelight. She was wearing sweatpants and one of his old t-shirts. She looked more beautiful than any woman he'd ever seen in a ballroom gown. Why are you still here? Lorenzo asked, voice low. I offer to fly you to Italy, to a safe house in Tuscany. You could be eating grapes in the sun, far away from this darkness. Because the boys are here, Sophie said. And because you're here. I am death, Sophie, Lorenzo warned, eyes searching hers. Everything I touch withers. My wife, my cousin, my soul. I will destroy you eventually. You didn't destroy me, Sophie whispered, tracing the line of his jaw. You saved me. You gave me a home. You gave me a purpose. She leaned in. The air between them crackled. This wasn't the desperate, adrenaline-fueled connection of the hospital. This was slow, deliberate. Lorenzo groaned. A sound of defeat and longing captured her lips with his. The kiss was searing, pouring months of fear and unspoken desire into a single moment. He pulled her into his lap, buried his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of her. For the first time in years, the storm inside his head went quiet. But the peace was shattered by the crack of thunder, or what sounded like thunder. Then came the alarm. Beep, beep, beep. Red emergency lights strobed in the hallway. Lorenzo was on his feet instantly, Sophie in his arms, placing her gently on the ground. The transition from lover to warlord was instantaneous. "The perimeter is breached," Lorenzo said, checking his weapon. "They cut the hard lines." "The boys," Sophie gasped. "Go to the panic room." "Now," Lorenzo commanded. "Do not stop for anything. Rocco is with them." "Lorenzo!" "Gio!" he roared, pushing her toward the stairs. Sophie ran, sprinted up the marble staircase, shoulder throbbing. Reached the nursery just as Rocco was ushering the terrified twins into the hidden passage behind the bookshelf. "Miss Vance, get in!" Rocco shouted, holding the heavy steel door open. Sophie looked at the boys. They were crying. Then she looked back down the hallway. Gunfire erupted downstairs. Automatic weapons. Sound of glass shattering. "Take them, Rocco," Sophie said, voice trembling but resolute. "What?" "No," the boss said. "Lorenzo is alone down there," Sophie said. "There are too many of them. I saw the cameras before the power cut. There are at least 20 men. I have orders to protect you." "Your orders are to protect the heirs," Sophie corrected him, shoving Matteo and Luca into the safe room. She kissed them both on the forehead. "Be brave. I love you." She slammed the steel door shut and spun the locking wheel before Rocco could stop her. She was alone in the hallway. She didn't have a gun, didn't know how to fight, but she knew the house. She knew that the Russians were brute force, but she was invisible. She remembered the lesson she taught the boys. Small things can trip big giants. Sophie ran to the master control panel in the linen closet. Main power was out, but the fire suppression system was manual. She waited, listened to boots thumping up the stairs. Heavy Russian accents barking orders. "Find the children. Kill the father. Leave the woman for the boss." Sophie's blood ran cold. They were coming for her, too. She waited until the footsteps reached the landing, until she heard them right outside the nursery door where they thought the children were hiding. Sophie yanked the lever for the halon gas suppression system, not for the whole house, specifically for the east wing hallway. Hiss! Gas flooded the corridor, sucking the oxygen out of the air instantly. It was designed to put out electrical fires, but it also incapacitated humans in seconds. The men in the hallway started coughing, choking, eyes burning. Sophie slipped out the back service stairwell, grabbed a heavy marble bust from a pedestal as she ran. She reached the balcony overlooking the foyer. Lorenzo was pinned down behind a tipped-over sofa. 3 men advancing on him, suppressing him with heavy fire. He was out of ammo. She could see him trying to reload, but he was cornered. One of the Russians, a giant with a scar across his face, climbed over the railing, raising a shotgun to finish Lorenzo off. Lorenzo didn't see him. "Hey!" Sophie screamed. The giant looked up. Sophie dropped the heavy marble bust of Julius Caesar directly onto the man's head. The impact was sickening. The man crumpled. Lorenzo looked up, shock registering on his face. He saw Sophie on the balcony. He saw the distraction she'd created. He didn't waste it. He lunged forward, grabbed the fallen shotgun, and unleashed hell. Boom! Boom! The other 2 attackers fell. Lorenzo looked up at her, chest heaving, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "I told you to go to the safe room," he shouted, though there was no anger in his voice. Only terrified relief. "I don't take orders well." Sophie shouted back. Suddenly, the front doors blew off their hinges. A second wave? No, it was flashing lights. Not police. Black tactical SUVs. More of Lorenzo's men. The reinforcement from the city had arrived. The remaining Russians threw down their weapons. The siege was over. Lorenzo didn't wait for the all-clear. He took the stairs 2 at a time, grabbed Sophie, crushed her to his chest, buried his face in her hair. He was shaking. The invincible Mafia Don was shaking. "You are insane," he whispered into her ear. "You are absolutely insane." "I learned from the best," Sophie sobbed, adrenaline finally wearing off as her knees gave way. Lorenzo caught her, held her, and for the first time in his life, Lorenzo Duca cried. Not from grief, from gratitude. 3 days later, the cleanup was efficient. In Lorenzo's world, messes disappeared quickly. Bodies were gone, glass replaced, blood scrubbed from marble. But the change in the Duca family was permanent. Sophie stood on the terrace, watching the sunset over the Atlantic. Her arm was in a sling again. She'd strained at throwing the bust, but she felt stronger than she ever had. The door opened. Lorenzo stepped out. He was dressed in a suit, but no tie. He looked lighter. The shadows under his eyes were gone. Petra is dead, Lorenzo said, joining her at the railing. His organization has been dismantled. The territories have been absorbed. There's no one left to challenge us. Us? Sophie asked, looking at him. Us, Lorenzo confirmed. He turned to face her. I spoke to the family lawyer this morning. I've drawn up adoption papers for the boys. Sophie's breath hitched. Adoption? They need a mother, Sophie. Not a governess. Not a friend. A mother. And by the way they look at you, they already made that choice months ago. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a ring. Not the signet ring this time. This was a diamond. A flawless emerald-cut diamond that caught the dying light of the sun. But a mother needs to be part of the family, Lorenzo said, dropping to one knee. Sophie put her hand over her mouth. Tears pricked her eyes. This wasn't a fairy tale. She knew exactly who he was. She knew the gun he carried. She knew the enemies he had. But she also knew the man who sat by his son's bed when he had a fever. She knew the man who'd torn the world apart to save her. Sophie Vance, Lorenzo said, voice thick with emotion. I cannot promise you a safe life. I cannot promise you a normal life. But I promise you that as long as there is breath in my lungs, no one will ever hurt you again. I promise to love you until the fire in the stars goes out. Will you marry me? Sophie looked down at him. She looked at the scars on his hands. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Lorenzo. He stood up and kissed her. A kiss that sealed a pact between the angel and the devil. The wedding was planned for 3 months later. Small, intimate, just family. But in Lorenzo's world, family meant the entire East Coast Commission. 200 guests. Half legitimate business associates. Half less legitimate. Sophie stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom. The wedding dress was simple. Elegant ivory silk. Nothing extravagant. She'd insisted on that. A knock at the door. Come in. The boys tumbled in, dressed in matching little tuxedos. 7 years old now. Taller. Less haunted. Mom, Matteo said, he called her that now. Had for months. You look like a princess. You look pretty, Luca added, clutching the ring bearer's pillow. Sophie knelt down, ignoring the tightness of the dress. You two look very handsome. Are you nervous? Matteo asked. A little. Are you? Papa says we get a real mom today, Lucas said. Not just a maybe mom. Sophie's throat tightened. You've had a real mom for a while now, sweetheart. But today it's official, Matteo said seriously. Papa showed us the papers. You're ours. Forever. Sophie pulled them both into a hug. Forever, she whispered. The ceremony was held in the estate gardens. White roses everywhere. String lights in the trees. An arch covered in jasmine and ivy. Sophie walked down the aisle alone. No one to give her away, because she was giving herself. Her choice. At the altar, Lorenzo waited. He looked devastatingly handsome in a black tuxedo. But what made Sophie's heart stutter was his expression. Awe, love, disbelief that this was real. She reached the altar. He took her hands. Hi, he whispered. Hi. The officiant began. But Sophie barely heard the words. She was too focused on Lorenzo's eyes, on the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the world. I, Lorenzo Duca, take you, Arya Sophie Vance, to be my wife, to love you in peace and protect you in war, to be worthy of your choice every single day. This I vow. I, Sophie Vance, take you, Lorenzo Duca, to be my husband, to see you when others see a monster, to love you when you forget how to love yourself, to choose you every single day. This I vow. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may. Lorenzo didn't wait. He pulled Sophie into his arms and kissed her. The crowd erupted. The children cheered. And Sophie Duca thought, this is home. The reception was in full swing. Music, dancing, laughter. Sophie danced with Lorenzo, with the boys, with Rocco, who blushed the entire time. She felt lighter than air. And then, Silas, one of Lorenzo's security chiefs, appeared at Lorenzo's shoulder, whispered something. Lorenzo's face went hard. What? Sophie asked. Nothing. Just business. I'll handle it. Lorenzo. It's fine. Dance with the kids. I'll be back in 5 minutes. He kissed her forehead and disappeared into the house. Sophie watched him go, that familiar dread settling in her stomach. She followed, through the crowd, into the house, down the hallway to Lorenzo's office. The door was closed. She pressed her ear against it. I don't care who sent you, Dante's voice. Cold, lethal. You leave. Now, or you don't leave at all. I'm just delivering a message. An unfamiliar voice. Young. Cocky. What message? The Calabrese alliance is nice. But alliances only last as long as they're profitable. And someone's made Salvatore a better offer. Who? A pause. The Volkov family. Russians. They want the port. All of it. And they're willing to go to war to get it. Let them try. They already have. The bombing at the warehouse yesterday? That was them. Testing your defenses. There was no bombing yesterday. Check the news, Mancini. Or better yet, check your phone. Silas has been trying to reach you for an hour. Sophie's blood went cold. She burst into the office. 3 men. The messenger. Silas. And Lorenzo. Arya. Lorenzo started. Is this true? Was there an attack? Yes. But it was contained. No casualties. I didn't want to ruin the wedding. You lied to me. I protected you. I told you not to do that. The messenger looked between them. Trouble in paradise already? Lorenzo's gun was out in a heartbeat, pressed to the man's forehead. Leave. Now. The messenger raised his hands. Back toward the door. The Volkovs will be in touch. He left. Silas followed, leaving Sophie and Lorenzo alone. You promised, Sophie said, voice shaking. You promised no more secrets. I didn't want to scare you. I'm not scared, Lorenzo. I'm angry. You made this decision for me. Again. Because I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection. I need a partner. Lorenzo slammed his fist on the desk. You think I don't know that? You think I don't hate that I have to worry about you every second of every day? That I have to calculate whether telling you the truth will make you leave? I'm not leaving. You say that now. But what happens when the next attack comes? When the next bullet flies? When our children are in danger again? Then we handle it. Together. Silence. Lorenzo's shoulders sagged. I don't know how to do this, Sophie. I don't know how to be a husband and a father and still be the man who keeps you all safe. Sophie crossed the room, took his face in her hands. Then let me help you figure it out. Act 4 ending. The honeymoon was postponed. The Volkov family was serious. 2 more attacks in a week. 1 at a warehouse. 1 at a shipping facility. No casualties. But the message was clear. Back down or escalate. Lorenzo called a meeting. Not just his men. The entire family. Sophie insisted on being there. The war room was in the basement. Concrete walls. Maps. Security feeds. 20 men around a table. And Sophie. She was the only woman. All eyes turned when she walked in. She doesn't belong here, one of the captains said. She's my wife, Lorenzo replied. She belongs wherever I say she belongs. Anyone disagree? Silence. Good. Silas, report. Silas stood. The Volkovs are moving fast. They've bought out half of Salvatore's men. They're offering triple what we pay. And they've put a bounty on your head, boss. 2 million. Let them try. There's more. They've been asking questions. About your family. The boys. The new wife. Lorenzo's face went cold. They're looking for leverage, another captain said. Then we hit them first, Lorenzo said. Hard. Fast. We eliminate their leadership before they make another move. That's a war, Silas warned. Then it's a war. Stop. Everyone turned to Sophie. You're thinking like the old Lorenzo, she said. The one who solves every problem with violence. This problem requires violence. Does it? Or does it require strategy? What are you suggesting? Sophie stood. Walked to the map on the wall. The Volkovs want the port. They're offering money to Salvatore's men. But money isn't loyalty. You know what is? Family. She turned to face the room. The Russians are outsiders. They don't understand how this city works. They don't have roots here. We do. So we remind Salvatore's men of that. We remind them that we've been here for generations. That we take care of our own. That the Russians will use them and discard them. And if that doesn't work, a captain asked, then we show them what happens to outsiders who try to take what's ours. Sophie looked at Lorenzo. But we try diplomacy first. Not because we're weak. Because we're smart. Lorenzo stared at her, then nodded. Do it. Silas, set up meetings with the defectors. One-on-one. Remind them where their loyalty belongs. And the Volkovs? We wait. Let them make the next move. And when they do, we're ready. One of Salvatore's men, a captain named Marco, agreed to meet. Neutral location. Coffee shop. Public. Sophie insisted on going. Absolutely not, Lorenzo said. He'll trust me more than you. Why? Because I'm not a threat. I'm just a wife. A mother. Someone who understands family. Lorenzo didn't like it, but he agreed. With 6 guards stationed around the cafe. Marco was in his 50s. Hard eyes. Scarred hands. He looked at Sophie with suspicion. Where's Mancini? Giving us space to talk. I don't talk to wives. Then you're about to start. Sophie sat down across from him. The Volkovs offered you money. Lots of it. I get it. You have a family to feed. Kids tope it through school. Marco said nothing. But money runs out. And when it does, the Russians will move on to the next guy. They don't care about you. They care about the port. And Mancini does. Dante cares about the people who are loyal to him. Always has. Always will. That's why Salvatore trusted him for 20 years. Salvatore took the Russians' money too. Because he's scared. Because he thinks the Mancinis are weak now. But he's wrong. Sophie leaned forward. My husband isn't weak. He's strategic. He stepped back from daily operations because he's building something bigger. Something that will last. And the people who stay loyal, they'll be part of that. And the people who don't, they'll regret it. Marco studied her. You're serious. Deadly. He laughed. A rough, gravelly sound. I like you, Mrs. Mancini. You got fire. Does that mean you're with us? Marco was quiet for a long moment, then extended his hand. Tell your husband I'm in, and I'll bring 5 others with me. Sophie shook his hand. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. The Volkovs won't take this lying down. Let them try. It happened fast. Marco returned to Lorenzo's fold. Brought 5 men with him. Others followed. Within a week, half of Salvatore's defectors had come back. The Volkovs were losing leverage, and they didn't like it. The bomb was in a package, delivered to the estate, addressed to Mrs. Mancini. Security caught it. Silas disarmed it. But the message was clear. You're next. Lorenzo went ballistic. That's it. We're moving you and the kids. Somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't reach. I'm not leaving. Sophie, I'm not leaving. If I run, they win. If I hide, they know they've scared us. They have scared us. No, Sophie said, voice steady. They've made me angry. There's a difference. This isn't a game. I know it's not. But I also know that if we run, this never ends. There will always be another threat. Another family. Another bomb. When does it stop, Lorenzo? It doesn't. Then we make it stop. Now. Here. We end this. Ow! Sophie looked at him. We go to the Volkovs. We sit down. Face to face. And we offer them a deal they can't refuse. They'll kill us. Maybe. But I don't think so. They want the port. We give them something else. Something better. What could be better? Access to our shipping routes. A partnership. They get a percentage of the profits without the war. Lorenzo stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You want me to partner with the people who just tried to kill my wife? I want you to end this so our children can grow up without fear. Lorenzo called the meeting. The Volkovs agreed. Neutral territory. A warehouse by the docks. Both sides armed. It was madness. But Sophie was right. It had to end. The warehouse smelled like salt and oil. Crates stacked to the ceiling. Dim lighting. Shadows everywhere. Lorenzo and Sophie walked in together. 6 guard behind them. Across the warehouse, the Volkov delegation. Their leader, Nikolai, was a mountain of a man. Bald. Scarred. Cold eyes. He looked at Sophie. You brought your wife to a war, council. I brought my partner. They sat at a table. Metal. Cold. Unforgiving. Why are we here, Mancini? Nikolai asked in heavily accented English. Because this war is bad for business, Sophie said. Nikolai laughed. The pretty wife speaks. The smart wife speaks, Sophie corrected. And the smart wife is offering you a deal. We don't need deals. We take what we want. You try to take what you want, Lorenzo said. And you fail. You've lost half your support. Your attacks have been stopped. And now you're sitting across from me, which means you're desperate. Nikolai's face hardened. We're not desperate. Then why are you here? Sophie asked. Silence. We're offering you access to our Atlantic shipping routes, Sophie continued. 20% of the profits. No war. No casualties. Just business. Why would we accept 20% when we can take 100? Because you can't, Lorenzo said. You don't have the infrastructure, the connections, the protection. We do. And if you go to war with us, you lose. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But eventually, you lose. Sophie leaned forward. Take the deal, Nikolai. Go home to your family. Let this end with a handshake instead of bloodshed. Nikolai looked at her for a long moment. Then at Lorenzo. Then at his men. 30%. 25, Lorenzo countered. Done. They shook hands. And just like that, another war was averted. The video camera wobbled as it recorded. Okay, is it on? A voice asked. It was Matteo, now 9 years old, voice cracking. Yes, it's on, dummy. Luca's voice replied from behind the lens. The camera focused on a backyard barbecue. It looked like a normal suburban scene, except for the security guards discreetly posted at the perimeter. In the center of the frame, Sophie was laughing. She was holding a toddler, a little girl with Lorenzo's dark eyes and Sophie's smile. Lorenzo was standing at the grill, flipping burgers. He was wearing an apron that said, "Kiss the cook." "Mom! Dad!" Matteo shouted. "Say hi to the future." Lorenzo looked up. The cold, hard mask of the Mafia Don was gone completely. He smiled. Genuine. Warm. He put his arm around Sophie and kissed her temple. "Put the camera away and come eat," Lorenzo called out. "Wait," Sophie said, looking into the lens. "I want to say something." She walked closer to the camera, the little girl resting on her hip. She looked directly into the lens, amber eyes shining with happiness and wisdom. "Life isn't about finding someone who's perfect," Sophie said. "It's about finding someone who will fight for you when the world is burning. It's about realizing that even in the darkest places, love can grow. We aren't a normal family, but we are real. And we have burgers," Lorenzo shouted from the back. Sophie laughed. "And we have burgers." The screen faded to black as the sound of laughter filled the air. Sophie stood in a conference room overlooking Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows. The city spread out below like a kingdom. But she wasn't here for the view. She was here for the ribbon cutting. The Sophie Vance Foundation, dedicated to helping families with medical debt, providing financial assistance, legal aid, and support. Named after the girl she used to be. Before the bullet. Before Lorenzo. Before everything changed. "Mrs. Duca," a reporter called out. "What inspired you to start this foundation?" Sophie smiled. "I remember what it's like to have nothing. To choose between rent and medicine. To feel invisible. This foundation exists so no one has to feel that way again." "And your husband supports this?" "Completely. In fact, he's the primary donor." Lorenzo stepped into frame. No longer the terrifying capo. Now a philanthropist. A businessman. A father. Still dangerous when needed. But choosing peace. "My wife taught me something," Lorenzo said, taking Sophie's hand. "That power isn't about how many people fear you. It's about how many people you can help." They cut the ribbon together. The foundation officially opened. That night, back at the estate, the family gathered. Matteo and Luca, now 11. Their daughter, Isabella, 5 years old. And twin boys, 3 months old. 7 children in total. For biological to Lorenzo and Sophie. 3 adopted from the same orphanage where Dante found them. "Bedtime," Sophie announced. Groans from the older boys. 5 more minutes. "Now," Lorenzo said, voice firm but warm. They scattered. Sophie and Lorenzo stood in the hallway, watching them go. "Can you believe this is our life?" Sophie asked. "Sometimes I wake up and think I'm dreaming." "If you are, don't wake up." Lorenzo pulled her close. "I won't." The end. Final reflection. Sophie Vance didn't just take a bullet for 2 children. She took a bullet for a family that didn't exist yet. For a future she couldn't see. For a man who thought he was beyond saving. And in doing so, she proved that the most powerful force in the world isn't violence. It's not money. It's not fear. It's a single act of selfless courage. Because when Sophie threw herself in front of that submachine gun, she didn't just save 2 boys. She saved a bloodline. She redeemed a man. She transformed an empire. From a waitress with $500 to her name to the queen of New York's underworld. From a girl with nothing to a woman with everything that matters. Sophie proved that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of it. And that sometimes the person who changes the world isn't the one with the power. It's the one with the courage to step into the line of fire and say, "Not today."